It was just after 11 p.m. on a breezy spring night in April 2022 when Ricky Gongora and his best friend Chris Caroli were driving home along the scenic Courtney Campbell Causeway, a stretch of road connecting Tampa to Clearwater with views of calm waters and city lights. The two had spent the evening at a small gathering and were heading westbound in Chris's Honda Civic, laughing, talking, completely unaware that they had less than 60 seconds to live. According to the Florida Highway Patrol crash report, the Civic was traveling at a normal pace in the right lane when it was violently rear-ended by a silver Dodge Charger moving at more than 100 miles per hour. The impact was so forceful that it launched the Honda into the air, flipped it end over end, and tore its rear axle off on contact. The driver of the Charger? Joshua Roloffs, 34, a former Polk County Sheriff's deputy and, as blood tests would later confirm, heavily intoxicated. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. Both Ricky and Chris were declared dead at the scene. Their bodies were pinned in the mangled shell of the Civic, surrounded by broken glass, twisted steel, and the personal effects they never got to take home. One officer, visibly shaken, was overheard saying, "It didn't even look like a car anymore." A single beer can, half crushed, lay near the front tire of the Charger. Roloffs, who sustained only minor injuries, was arrested on site and later charged with 2 counts of DUI manslaughter, vehicular homicide, and reckless driving resulting in death. At the hospital, he refused to speak to investigators, invoking his right to silence. For the families of Ricky and Chris, the news shattered everything. "They were just going home," said Ricky's father through tears during a vigil held days later. "He was 27. He had a fiancée. He was going to propose this summer. Now I have to bury my son because someone thought drinking and driving was worth the risk." Chris Caroli's mother described him as the glue of our family. A quiet, dependable soul who played guitar at church on Sundays and always called his grandmother on Fridays. "They didn't just lose their lives," she said. "They were stolen." The Courtney Campbell crash quickly made headlines across Florida, not just because of the horrific images from the scene, but because of who was behind the wheel. Roloffs had once worn the badge. From 2012 to 2015, he served as a deputy with the Polk County Sheriff's Office before being fired for falsifying time cards. According to internal records, Roloffs had repeatedly claimed hours he didn't work and was ultimately terminated for dishonesty unbecoming of a sworn officer. To many, this history only deepened the pain. A man who once swore to protect the public had taken 2 innocent lives and had done so, prosecutors argued, with complete disregard for human life. Even more troubling, Roloffs was released on 4-0 bond for taking 2 lives. As his case crawled through pre-trial motions over the next 2 years, the families of Ricky and Chris waited for their day in court. They showed up to every hearing. They brought photos, sat silently in the front row, and hoped for one thing: justice. But in March 2025, that hope was ripped away again. On the morning jury selection was scheduled to begin, Joshua Roloffs didn't show up. His attorney claimed to have lost contact with him the night before. By noon, the judge had revoked his bond and issued a warrant for his arrest. The man who had taken 2 lives while drunk, who once wore the uniform, was now a fugitive. And for the families of Ricky Gongora and Chris Caroli, the grief had turned into something else: rage. March 11, 2025, a date that was supposed to bring closure to 2 grieving families. The courtroom was prepared, the jury summoned, and the prosecution ready to deliver opening arguments in the trial of Joshua Roloffs, the ex-deputy accused of killing Ricky Gongora and Chris Caroli while driving drunk. But there was one glaring absence. The defendant never showed up. Inside the Hillsborough County Courthouse, confusion turned quickly to alarm. Court officials whispered among themselves. The judge called for a recess. Meanwhile, the families of the victims sat in the front row, clutching framed photos, unaware that the man responsible for their pain had vanished. At 10:17 a.m., the bailiff returned with an update that confirmed their worst fears: Joshua Roloffs was missing. The judge immediately revoked bond and issued a bench warrant for his arrest. Media outlets scrambled for updates. Reporters outside the courthouse pivoted from a trial preview to breaking news. Ex-deputy accused of killing two, now a fugitive. The public was outraged and confused. How could a man facing 2 counts of DUI, manslaughter, and vehicular homicide simply walk free on 4-0 bond? How was he allowed to await trial outside of custody, despite evidence that included blood alcohol reports, dashcam footage, and crash reconstruction analysis? The questions piled up, and the answers for many were unacceptable. "He's not just running from a court date," said Ricky Gongora's father, voice trembling with fury. "He's running from accountability, from our family, from the truth. They told us to be patient, to trust the system. Now the system has lost him," added Chris Caroli's sister, clutching a tear-stained notebook filled with letters she'd planned to read aloud during sentencing. According to officials, Roloffs was last seen the night before at a gas station in Lakeland, Florida. Surveillance footage showed him fueling up his pickup truck. He wore jeans, a black hoodie, and a ball cap pulled low over his face. There was no indication of panic, no rushed behavior. He looked calm. Since then, no activity on his credit cards, no phone pings, and no confirmed sightings. Authorities suspect he may have had help, possibly from friends or family, and may be attempting to leave the state, or even the country. The U.S. Marshals joined the manhunt by the end of the week. Billboards went up along I-4 and I-75 with his face and the words, "Wanted, armed, and dangerous." In a press release, the state attorney's office expressed deep disappointment and pledged full resources to locating and prosecuting the defendant. But behind closed doors, frustration grew over how a former law enforcement officer, with knowledge of police procedures and likely access to weapons, was not considered a flight risk. It wasn't long before the public demanded answers. Online, hashtags like "Justice for Ricky and Chris" and "Find Roloffs" began trending. Op-eds slammed the criminal justice system. Radio hosts opened their shows with questions like, "What message are we sending when 2 lives cost less than a used car in bail?" In Polk County, where Roloffs once served as a deputy, the silence didn't last long. Sheriff Grady Judd took the microphone. "Let me make this clear. Joshua Roloffs is a coward. He killed 2 people. He had the chance to face justice and he ran. That tells you everything you need to know about his character." He continued, "This isn't just a failure of one man. This is a failure of a bond system that lets someone walk out of jail for 4-0 after taking 2 lives. If it doesn't make your blood boil, you're not paying attention." By the end of the week, Florida Crime Stoppers had offered a reward for any information leading to Roloffs' arrest. But for now, the courtroom sat empty. The jury was dismissed. And 2 families returned home with nothing but grief and no resolution. Justice had been delayed, and in the eyes of many, it had been denied. Before he became a fugitive, Joshua Roloffs was something else entirely. A uniformed deputy with the Polk County Sheriff's Office, once trusted to protect the very communities he would later devastate. His law enforcement career began in 2012, when he joined the department straight out of the academy. At first, colleagues described him as quiet, observant, and disciplined. But over time, cracks began to show: missed shifts, short temper, and a mounting number of internal complaints. The final straw came in 2015, when an internal audit revealed that Roloffs had falsified time cards, repeatedly logging hours he never worked. According to internal disciplinary reports later leaked to the press, Roloffs had been habitually dishonest about his patrol shifts and displayed patterns of misconduct incompatible with the ethics of the office. He was terminated and stripped of his law enforcement credentials. "He wore the badge," said one former colleague, "but he didn't carry the responsibility that came with it." After his firing, Roloff seemed to disappear from the public eye. He worked sporadic jobs, warehouse work, landscaping, security gigs. But for those who knew him, his fall from grace had left a lingering bitterness. Some speculated that his resentment toward the system that rejected him festered silently for years. Then, in April 2022, he became infamous. On that night, with a blood alcohol content nearly twice the legal limit, Roloffs sped down the Courtney Campbell Causeway at over 100 miles per hour, slamming into the back of a small sedan and killing two innocent men, Ricky Gongora and Chris Caroli. But what made this case different wasn't just the horror of the crash, it was who the driver was, a former cop. Someone who once swore to uphold the law and now stood accused of breaking it in the most irreversible way. For the families of the victims, that betrayal cut deep. "He used to write tickets for speeding," said Ricky's uncle. "Now he's the one who killed my nephew doing 100 in a 45, drunk off his mind. That's not irony, that's betrayal." Chris Caroli's mother echoed that pain during a public memorial. He was supposed to be someone people could trust. Instead, he destroyed two families. And now he runs? That's not a man. That's a disgrace. The betrayal extended beyond the personal, it became institutional. Critics of the justice system questioned how someone with Roloffs' background, a former officer fired for dishonesty, was granted bond after a double fatality. "This is what happens when we treat ex-cops like they're above the system," said one legal analyst on a local radio station. "The badge may be gone, but the leniency lingered." And then came the ultimate act of cowardice: flight. In the weeks following his disappearance, the Polk County Sheriff's Office received dozens of tips. Roloffs was supposedly seen in Georgia, then in Alabama, then in Tennessee. None were confirmed. Every dead end only deepened the wound, especially for Sheriff Grady Judd, who had once worn the same uniform as Roloffs. In a Fox 13 interview, Judd said bluntly, "When you wear the badge and you betray it, that's bad enough. But when you kill two people and run from justice, that's a legacy of shame. He's not one of us. He never was." Judd also revealed that Roloffs had been flagged internally back in 2014 for attitude problems and disregard for protocol, but had avoided suspension due to lack of formal complaints. "There were signs," Judd said, "and the system missed them. That's on all of us." The case now stood as more than a criminal investigation. It had become a cautionary tale about unchecked power, broken accountability, and the consequences of a badge worn without honor. As the manhunt continued, one thing was clear. Joshua Roloffs had gone from protector to predator and now to prey. When Sheriff Grady Judd finally stepped in front of the cameras to address the case of Joshua Roloffs, there was no hesitation, no effort to soften the blow. The sheriff, known nationwide for his directness and zero-tolerance stance, had just one goal: to make sure the world understood what was at stake. This man took two lives while drunk. He was trusted once with a badge. And now, when it's time to face justice, he runs. He's not a man, he's a coward. That line, "he's a coward," would become the defining quote of the case. It played across every major Florida news station that night. But Judd wasn't done. Flanked by deputies and standing in front of the Polk County Sheriff's Office insignia, he laid out the facts with the tone of a man personally offended by what had occurred. Joshua Roloffs had a chance to stand in front of a jury and explain his actions. He had a chance to look those families in the eyes. But instead, he chose to disappear. "And let me tell you something. We're going to find him." The press conference lasted only 12 minutes, but every second hit like a hammer. Judd openly criticized the bond system that allowed Roloffs to walk free on 4-0 after being charged with 2 counts of DUI manslaughter. $4,000. That's all it took to let a killer walk out the front door. 2 lives and he paid less than someone does for a used dirt bike. That's not justice. That's a disgrace. He called on state legislators to revisit bond guidelines for violent crimes involving DUI, especially when there's loss of life. His demand was simple: no bond for killers, period. The sheriff then addressed the families of Ricky Gongora and Chris Caroli directly. "I want them to know, we haven't forgotten. We won't forget. And every officer in this state is now looking for Roloffs. His name, his face, it's out there. His time is limited." Judd confirmed that the U.S. Marshals, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, and local law enforcement agencies across 5 states had joined the manhunt. Billboards, digital alerts, and reward posters were distributed. He even called on the public: "If you know anything about where this man is, do the right thing. Two families deserve peace, and this fugitive deserves prison. The sheriff didn't hold back his anger. Not just at Roloffs, but at the justice system's failure to keep him contained. This guy once wore a badge. That makes his crime worse, not better. He knew how the law worked. He knew what he was doing. And now, he's using everything he learned to hide from accountability. That's the definition of betrayal. By the time Judd ended his remarks, his message was echoing far beyond Polk County. Major news outlets ran headlines like, "Grady Judd, we will find him. Sheriff calls fugitive ex-deputy, a coward who fled justice. Florida manhunt intensifies as families wait." Online, support for Judd poured in. Victims' rights groups praised his speech. Retired officers posted messages of solidarity. Even lawmakers who rarely agreed with Judd publicly backed his call for reform. But in Lakeland, Tampa, and Clearwater, for the families who had buried Ricky and Chris, it was more than a press conference. It was a promise. "You don't get to kill and run," Judd said in his final words. "Not in my state, not on my watch. We will find you, Joshua Roloffs, and when we do, you're going away for a long, long time." As of now, the manhunt continues. The families wait. The court date remains empty. But one thing is certain. Justice delayed will not be. Justice denied, not as long as Grady Judd is on the case.